Welcome back to the I Think Therefore podcast. I'm TJ Carpenter. First and foremost, I want to thank everybody who has been so patient waiting for this third episode. I know a lot of you have reached out to me and asked me when the third episode was coming out, and here it is. I apologize for it taking so long, but this is a very important topic to me for a number of different reasons, and I just felt like I needed to get some more input from some different sources of information. I think because we're talking about faith, which is a very important topic to a lot of people, um, I wanted to make sure that I addressed a lot of different angles on this. So this is probably not going to be the last episode on this topic, I promise. But as I always hope everybody remembers, we are trying to grow something here. So please, by all means, continue to interact with the podcast. I would love to get your feedback on things. You can email me, tjcarpenter.show@gmail.com. Just email me there, and yeah, let's have a conversation about this because I think that this is a really important topic to a lot of people for a very good reason. Faith is a really important cornerstone of a lot of people's lives, um, and so my relationship with faith has been, I would say, unique. It's different than what I would imagine most people's relationship with the concept is. I have been a great skeptic in my life for for a lot of different reasons, but I certainly think that faith is one of those things that creates a dividing line between people a lot of times. So how you define things a lot of times can change your perspective on them. And I really do think that that is foundational to the concept of faith, because as I will explain, um, you know, listening to religious people discuss faith or people who have had some kind of transformative experience that they have chosen to assign a tremendous amount of spiritual value to, um, can create faith or belief from nothing. And this is the really important distinction I think that I want to make about faith because to me, like I said, perspective is very important. And if you come from a perspective where you have always accepted a certain view of reality where God is in charge, so to speak, at the top of the pyramid, the ultimate pyramid, um, of all things. He's at the top, or she's at the top, or it's at the top, or however you want to define that. We'll have another episode on God later. So far, we've done basically just how you build morality spaces from the self as opposed to from God. Obviously, we'll do God at some point as well. But when it comes to faith or a belief from a source that you can't pinpoint necessarily, um, I think that there are a lot of reasons. I think very good reasons to employ a certain amount of spiritual faith in your life. And what I mean by that is that people who choose to do so, um, I think that there are completely valid, legitimate reasons for doing so that have nothing to do with what's rational, um, or rationalization. Not necessarily rationalization, that's the wrong word, but the process of rational thinking, being a rational thinker. Because I would imagine that a lot of you who are listening to this right now believe that you are a rational thinker, just as I believe I am a rational thinker. And I would say that my commitment to rational thinking is pretty high up there. I really do try to commit to a certain level of uniformity in how I frame my view of the world, and how I make decisions. But it's everybody's different. There has to be some sort of really good foundational place for belief, right? And so when you come in and tell somebody else that their foundation for their belief system is erroneous, that it's not real, there is no foundation, that you're looking at it and it's not there, even though you see something there, they're telling you it's not there, and I think that that can be really off-putting. I think that that can really, I think it's been one of the most damaging things in the history of humanity that we have not been able to have a conversation about these things, about this feeling that we all have, that we can't really explain, that we're trying to put labels on, that we're trying to figure out the origin of. Because everybody has these feelings, I think, at one point or another, where they question where everything comes from, and so that's what we're going to talk about when we have this conversation about faith. Okay, it's not really the faith of like, oh, I have faith that my spouse will do what he says. Like there's a faith that we put in one another. It is an assumption of somebody else doing something because we know things about that person, right? So and you would say, well, there's a pattern of behavior there that that person has that has allowed me to build this faith in them, And I would say that that is not necessarily faith, but trust. And when I was a sports talk radio host in Kansas City, I had this article that I wrote for our website, and it was about the difference that different sports fan bases have in their teams. That there are some teams that you can put your trust in, and others you must have faith in, right? Either way, you have chosen to put your allegiance in that team. And so, really, the only thing that changes is whether or not that team gives you reasons to believe in them. Because if they give you reasons to believe in them, then all of a sudden, faith turns into trust. And so, I think that that's where evidence, from a physical perspective, people get really hung up on the distinction that I don't need faith because I have trust in things, and I know that I can trust things based off of this formula that science has given me, and I trust that. And look, I think most people trust it. I think that that's how most people's minds work intuitively. The fact that we've written it down is very valuable, and that we've been able to standardize it into some sort of scientific method is really good. That we can catalog data, that we can quantize things. That's really, really important. And the problem is that there are some things that you can't measure. And I know that we've talked about this in a previous episode, but I think that the measurement problem is kind of science's version of the faith barrier. Because in quantum physics, when you talk about quantum physics, the math that nobody understands, all of that stuff, time travel and how the nature of the universe really works, all of that, it's prohibitive. It's prohibited from being truth because of the measurement problem. And, I think that there are some really brilliant people out there who operate in that space. Sean Carroll is a really good example. He is a tremendous thinker. But he is also somebody who I would say, I think if you had to label him, and I don't really want to, but I think to make things easy for people to kind of understand here, I will generalize for a second. I think that he is an agnostic person. At his core, just because simply he knows that there are things that he can and can't measure. And the things that he can't measure, he knows there's just no real physical foundational truth for. But he does know that there are some really good reasons to believe in certain things from a math perspective. Like he is a big fan of the Everettian many worlds theory of quantum physics, which basically says that there's an infinite amount of worlds that are being created all the time. As time progresses, these infinite worlds are being like divided into infinity all the time, which is very interesting. It's a very interesting concept. Actually, if you watch the show Devs, they kind of talk a little bit about that. It's on FX. Pretty good show. Anyways, so I think that that's kind of the science version, a little bit. I don't want to compare apples to oranges. I would like to say that there are some pretty significant distinctions here, but I would also like to make a little bit of a case for this kind of spiritual search that I think that we should engage in, that everybody should engage in. And I didn't always think that, but I do now, and a part of it has to do with a transformative experience, which we'll get into at one point or another. But when it comes to that, I think that there is an absolute legitimacy to saying that we are kind of in this infinite prison, right? As each individual person, we have two sides of things. We have the physical side of things, our physical observations and sensations that we all have, and how we see the universe and the place that we live. And there's kind of limitations to that, right? You can only travel so far before you realize you're never going to see the end of the universe, right? It's impossible. We're in an infinite physical prison, really. And so the exploration of those concepts, even in the physical universe, go all the way up to the enormously large, which we can't find the end of the universe, if it's limited or not. We don't know where the end is, or that if there is an end. So there's that part, and then you go all the way down to the infinitesimally small, and it's like we can only measure things that we can attach some sort of measurement apparatus to. Which means that basically we can only measure. We've come up with this theory that there is a wave function of the universe that is only there when we're not looking at it, and then when we are looking at it, it's actually stuff that actualizes. But we can't actually we can't see it move because it's so fast. It's too fast to measure. So that's the measurement problem. Like we have a maximum and a minimum amount that we can see and view and scan as human beings and learn about. But on the flip side of that, I think that there's also a truth to the idea that, the self, this subjective conscious experience that we're all having, has the same kind of feeling to it. It has the same kind of limitations of infinity kind of placed upon it at the singular level, or the most you feel, and then the outer level, whatever that is, that you can seem to get into on different levels. I think Locke Kelly talks about it being it's like the onion. At the at the finest point of view, the center of view, if you can ever find that. It's just a tiny point of light or something like that. And then, you keep going out and out and out and out into the universe, and it's like you are space for the universe to exist. And all of that stuff is layered. So there's like, it's like infinitesimally small. You can only get so small and understand it at such a small level before it's like it's not there. And then you go out all the way to the infinite, and you're like, is that God? I don't know. I don't understand what that feeling is, what that means. I'm not really sure how to describe that feeling. It feels good. I know that. But I can't really explain it. I just know that it makes me appreciate life. It makes me understand kind of a uniformity of things, kind of a unity of things that I didn't previously understand, and it had some sort of transformative spiritual experience on me that has impacted me. And so maybe I do have some faith in some things that aren't there, right? So people describe this in different ways, but I think kind of trying to put it out in literal terms, because everybody's kind of connection with that, the exploration of your own mind, meditation, prayer, whatever you want to call it, but it's a space in which you're silent, and you can kind of hear the ringing of the universe, if you know what I mean. There's kind of silence has a sound. It's kind of like this high tinged ringing, and it's quiet enough to where you can kind of experience things in a meditative state. You start to realize your breath, you become very conscious of your body, you stop moving, you realize that when you stop moving, your sensory experience of who you are it kind of changes, and so when you have this experience, and I think that spiritual people, I'm not just talking about like Buddhist meditation. It's not I think anybody can meditate. You can just sit down, and then you should be quiet with your thoughts, and eventually things will happen. You either kind of work through your own thoughts, or you can do the breathing exercises that Sam Harris and a lot of other contemplative people will put out there. These different kind of humanist exercises, or secular exercises. I don't really know what kind of label to put on them. But I think that they certainly fall into the realm of spirituality. And so, you know, I want to be really careful when I talk about faith around people, because I think everybody kind of has their own experience with that and they think it's unique. And then in that way, a lot of people just don't talk about it now. I think it's started to become one of those things that people really don't want to talk about, because so much disagreement happens in our unique experiences with those concepts. So I wanted to just kind of lay all that out, and I apologize if that wasn't as clear as I wanted it to be, or if you're confused by what I'm saying. But just really for a moment, just try to suspend your own concepts and just think about these things in as abstract of terms as possible. So you as an individual have information in your brain. You know things. There are certain things that are known. We've talked about this before. The idea that you are experiencing something is an absolute truth. There is no way around it. So that's something that you know, knowledge, right? That's one realm of stuff. Then outside of the known, there is the unknown but knowable, right? Things that you know are out there, but you don't know them, right? You might have a label for them. You might have some sort of general idea that they exist, but you don't really have any specific information about them. But you realize that it is knowable but unknown, right? So then there's that space. Then on the outside of that, there is the unknowable, right? These are things that it is impossible to know. One of those things, the most important, I think, in everybody's mind, is what happens after we die. Because we don't know where we came from. We have a really kind of like physical foundation for where we came from, obviously from birth. But the idea of us, we don't really have an answer for that. We kind of have we have theories about the origin of existence from a central point. Basically, that's kind of what we've come to, is that there was a central point at some way distant past, and now it exploded, and now all the stuff's here. That's really all we kind of know from a physical perspective, right? From a spiritual perspective, there's like a billion different, there are as many theories as there are people on the planet about that. So, you know, it's really hard. But I think the bigger question, because that question is kind of unanswerable, it is also unknowable. But we think we might find out, right? You know, we think at the end, what happens to us when we die? That's the big question. So a lot of the foundations of that come from the foundations of those concerns. What happens to us after we die create the need, this insatiable need for an answer to that question, right? Why do we have that? We don't know. We don't know why. No one does. But one of the ways in which that we have found to cope with things that we don't know is to create some sort of foundation for believing one way or the other, having some sort of resolution to an unanswerable question so that we can move on. And what we've found is that there are some methods of doing that which seem to be beneficial to people. And so when you see somebody displaying those actions in their lives or things like that, all of a sudden it can create a track record of a belief system being beneficial to a person's life. And so when people, I think in a modern context, in a Christian context especially, discuss the concept of faith, that's what they're talking about. There is a biblical definition of the word faith, Hebrews 11:1. Faith is the assured expectation of things hoped for, the evident demonstration of realities, though not beheld. That's the New World Translation definition, which I think is a very good one. There's some more poetic versions out there, but I think that one's got some good descriptive words in it. But the layman's terms, that's faith. Faith is belief without evidence. but then again, you have to define what sufficient evidence is. And as we've talked about, there are limitations to the physical measurement of things. So there's a limitation to your ability to provide evidence of certain things from a physical world. Then there's the representative world, the world of math, right? The world of symbols and things like that. And so you can say, well, there are ways you can prove things through math that you can't prove through physical reality. But then again, I would argue, what does that tell you about the universe? It doesn't give you a definitive answer. But at any rate, there's also symbols, right? So symbols is another thing. But I think the thing that we've really disregarded in terms of trying to come up with a cataloged, um, standardized, some semblance of a kind of methodology in measuring some sort of ability to measure what goes on inside of our own subjective experiences. Um, and obviously symbols, writing these things down, that's what a lot of people have displayed with religious texts. But the question is whether or not you believe that your experience or whatever it is that you had that has built this faith in you was real or not. And I think that that's a really interesting point, because to go back to my really abstract concept of what we are and are not allowed to know in life. There are some things there are things that you can know, and then there is the unknowable. The unknowable area, the unknowable space. People keep trying to know it, and I think that that's really where the faith part of it comes in. It's like, well, we have no idea. And I think for a lot of people, that's insufficient. I think for me, it's insufficient. It becomes insufficient over time, I think, for a lot of people. For a long time, I would say, a devout atheist. I was fairly committed to the idea that there was no God, there is nothing that happens after death, and I was completely comfortable with that. And I think one of the reasons why is because my upbringing was unique from a Christian perspective, in that Jehovah's Witnesses do not believe in hell. So I had already had implanted in my mind the idea that nothing happened after death. So it was very easy for me to adopt atheism after seeing some of the literal inconsistencies in Christian belief systems. And look, we can talk about the differences between what people knew back when the Bible was being written and what people know now, and whether or not some of the things they wrote down were right or wrong or are now outdated, but then some of the other stuff that they wrote was actually really valuable. We can have all those discussions. I get that a lot of people are going to get defensive about establishing that what they believe is true. But what I'm trying to do is I do believe, and this is where I think my hope comes in, because I have no evidence to support this, other than just simply the idea that everybody is wrong, but kind of right. And then we just have to figure out where everybody's rightness kind of lines up, right? Um, and that might give us some semblance of uniformity in how we can move forward and advance the cause of spirituality. Because I do think that making it a cause, just saying in general that you should be looking into these things about yourself and about the universe, and you should be asking these questions. I don't know really, I don't have any evidence to support this. Once again, this is just me spitballing here. But when I think about, my personal transformative experience, and I hesitate to call it a spiritual experience, because it didn't make me believe in something that I didn't believe in previously, but it opened up my mind to the possibility of certain things being true that I previously did not have an openness to. So that's why I call it a transformative experience. But when people have these transformative experiences, I think you have to assign value to them in some way. They have to either mean something to you or not. And like I said, I don't have any evidence to support this or anything, but I think that there's something about being on this planet for a certain amount of time, and I think that for most people that amount of time is around 30 years. Sometimes it's a little longer, sometimes it's a little shorter, but I think for most people, about 30 years in, you're going to have some kind of transformative experience. It can be associated with childbirth. I think it can be associated with bringing life into the world. Um, I think it can be like my experience was, where I just kind of saw some stuff. um, or it can be or it can be, some other kind of life altering event. Perhaps you get cancer. Perhaps you have a terminal illness. Perhaps a relative of yours has a terminal illness and you lose everything. You go through a really hard a financial hardship, something that makes your life flip from being something that was comfortable to something that is extraordinarily uncomfortable, but something that makes you see the world in a different place, from a different perspective, from a different point of view. And I think that those, when those moments happen, um, you know, it, it can change your perspective on what what you're allowed to believe, right? Whether or not you, as an individual, have to conform to somebody else's definition of true. I think that's a really, um, I think that's a hard thing for scientists to accept when it comes to belief. Things they believe. They really have to put it into, a perspective that they understand, and they have to put it into measurable terms. They have to check their sources, right? They have to confirm their findings, and I think that that's maybe one of the bigger issues with faith, is that you can't confirm anything. It's one shot, right? You don't get to set the terms of the experiment, and so it's very difficult to experiment with those things and then write those findings down and to put it into terms people can understand. And so people will say, well, I know that I can trust the experience that I had, because I know that subjective experience is mine, and I also know that I need to enrich it, and this seemed to be an enriching experience in a lot of different ways, so I'm going to follow that. um, and you know I think that that's a really good reason to have faith. Um, Now, the number of people who say that they have religious faith that are displaying that level of commitment to the search, I think is very, very slim. I think that's a small percentage of people. I think when most people talk about faith, they just kind of have this generalized idea that I need to believe that good things are going to happen after I die. Otherwise, good things aren't going to happen after I die. And I need to do what this book tells me to do. Otherwise, if I don't do what this book tells me to do, it's going to be bad for me. And I think that's a childlike view of it. But what happens when you start off on that path of, all right, I have to do what this book tells me to do, and then it becomes habit, and you start habit assigning things to this belief system, then all of a sudden your habits just kind of take over, and it really, I think that religion is a really effective way of forming habits, um, because of the repetition and of these things. And so if you hear something enough times, eventually you will start to believe it. Your body will your brain is built that way. Repetition equals, the more time you spend thinking about something is going to affect you. Eventually, you are what you eat. You are what you put into your mind. So remember that. And I think that I think that, that when it comes to having faith that something is there that isn't there, or that you can't prove is there, you're saying, I know it's there, but it's not there. I know that a lot of people will describe the wind, right? From a visual perspective, you can't see the wind, but you can see the effect of the wind. And they would say, well, that's faith. But I would say, well, you can't see it, but I have this machine that shows me exactly what's happening with wind, and how temperature affects the movement of things, and how all of these physical processes are connected, the same kind of physical forces that are affecting wind are the same kinds of physical forces that actually create magnets. I mean, like, there's all kinds of things that people are like these physical process, like you can measure all of these different things, right? You can measure all of them with science. Physically, we understand the universe, but the analogy of saying I can see the effect of something without its presence is yeah, I get it. I understand what you're saying. I think that without the transformative experiences, I think putting labels on things, saying that one person was right, I think that is where we have to stop, right? That's where we have to say, okay, well, you've got faith that certain things are going to happen. Okay, all right, I understand that you've had an experience or experiences, whether those be profound or habitual, that have created this faith-based belief in you. You have inculcated it in your body, so you have it. I'm not denying that. No one's going to deny that. When it comes to the definitiveness of the way things are, or the way that certain morality systems work, the certainty is what we have to get away from, because we don't know these things for certain. Um, that's where we have to pull back. I think, when Christians say, well, atheists don't know any more than I know. Okay, all right, you're right. But you need to stop acting like you know. That's part of the idea that we're challenging here, and that I think should be challenged. Okay, equate positivity in your life to the power of habit all you want to. Equate the positivity of your life to going through an experience that gave you a new outlook and a new perspective and made you happy all you want to. But the idea that there are certain morality systems that are correct and certain morality systems that are incorrect, or that there are certain ways in which the universe is definitively built from a spiritual perspective, is just not. There is nothing in any experience that anybody can have that would justify the certainty of any individual belief system. And that is a really, really, really difficult thing for people to accept. Um, it is, because we're so built in, we have it so ingratiated in us that we are rational. Every single one of us. No one will openly admit, I'm not really a rational person. Some people will say, well, occasionally I'm not rational. But no one will ever say, I am just not a rational person. No one's like that. Everyone believes that what they think is right. And so I think more so than anything else, I would caution people who want to lean on faith, or want to believe that faith is a fast lane to prosperity or happiness, because that's what creates blind people. That's what creates the sheeple. That's what creates the masses, that everybody on the outside looks into believers in the Christian faith, in particular in America, and says, those people are not rational people. Those people are crazy. And it's not that they're crazy, it's that they are looking for an easy way out. They're looking for a cheap ticket, you know? Oh, as long as I have faith, I'm fast tracked to heaven, man. And it's like, all right, I want the good thing. I have to do this thing to get the good thing. And then that's as far as they get, which is unfortunate. I think, I'm not going to advocate for going to church, because I'm not a church guy, but I would say that you should definitely think about being contemplative, certainly. And if you have some really positive effects from faith, I don't want to diminish those, because like I said, I think that there are some real positive things that come out of faith. But to I think to try to hold other people to the same standards of faith, or the things that you have faith in, uh, as you hold yourself to, is not only unfair. I think it's not. that's one of those places where I think everybody has to have their own experience, right? And that experience belongs to them. It's one of the few things that's theirs. They get to choose it. They can choose to end it if they want. Certainly don't want to see that, but I mean that it's theirs. Your life is yours, so you can't really just force it. I mean, we need to be able to have this dialogue without having the need, the necessity for an answer, or the necessity to be right or to be the right party in any of this. So those are some of my introductory comments on faith. I would love to get some feedback from people on faith, and some of my thoughts on this. Because like I said, I think that there's some positive ways to go about it. I think there's a certain way to look at it in which faith is positive, certainly, but has maybe some places that it is being applied that it shouldn't be. And then I think that there's also a way to look at faith and say, hey, look, it's basically a coping mechanism for people who are having a really bad time with the unknowable. They don't know what's going to happen. They want to trust this other person. It's easier to trust this other person than to try to figure it out on their own. And since they already know that there's no point in trying to figure it out because they're never going to get the answer, they're just looking at the destination and not the journey, then it's just like, that's the easy way to get to it. So, and I'm not saying any individual person who's listening to this is that way. Not at all. Like I said, every single person who's listening to this right now believes they're a rational, intelligent person. So obviously, there is something that you understand about your faith that no one else is going to understand unless they've had extremely similar experiences to yours. So like I said, it's completely subjective, and you have to accept the subjectivity of it in order to appreciate it. Because I think it can be personally useful. I think that there's a lot of really good things about faith, but I think in terms of categorizing it as foundational, I think in some way to the rightness or the correctness of dogma it's not. You've got to you can't allow for faith to exist in a grand context the way that I'm talking about it, and then also accept rules. So if I would to conclude here, and I hope some of you are still listening, I think I would advocate for faith without rules. Certainly, facts must have rules. Faith cannot. Faith cannot have rules. It just can't, because it's too subjective of an experience. It's too subjective of. It is completely. It is as unique to you as you. So that's the only real way that I think that you can apply faith. Otherwise, I think in the grand uniformity of things, you're just really advocating for the power of habit, which is extraordinarily powerful. And we could talk about the power of habit in religion and faith and belief on another podcast. But that's going to do it for us for this one. I want to thank everybody for listening. And once again, please interact with the show. You can email me your thoughts, tjcarpenter.show@gmail.com. You can also hook up with me on Twitter, on Facebook. I know most of you who are probably listening to this see me on Facebook, so I'd love to talk with you about it. By all means, please reach out. That's going to do it for me.